I woke up to the sound of chainsaws screaming through the morning air, and my first thought was that someone nearby was doing yard work way too early on a Saturday. Then, I remembered I lived on 5 acres at the edge of town, and my nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. I threw off the covers and ran to the window, still in my boxer shorts and undershirt, and what I saw made my blood run cold. 3 men in reflective vests were systematically cutting down my apple trees, the same trees my grandfather had planted in 1965, the same trees that had fed 4 generations of my family. I am Isaac Zimmerman, and I had inherited this property in rural Washington state from my grandfather 2 years ago. The old farmhouse sat on the outskirts of Wenatchee, in the heart of apple country, and the 90 apple trees that formed a perfect grid behind the house were more than just trees to me. They were living history. My grandfather had started this orchard when he was 25 years old, carefully selecting heritage varieties that were becoming rare even back then. He had tended them through droughts and freezes, through good years and bad, and when he passed away at 87, he left them to me with a handwritten note that simply said, "Take care of them, and they'll take care of you." I pulled on jeans and boots so fast I nearly tripped down the stairs. By the time I burst out the back door, they had already felled a dozen trees. The sound was deafening, and the smell of fresh cut wood and apple blossoms mixed in the air in a way that made me want to vomit. I ran toward the nearest worker, waving my arms and shouting over the noise. "Stop! What the hell are you doing? This is my property." The man nearest me shut off his chainsaw and lifted his safety goggles. He looked to be in his 40s with a weathered face and tired eyes. "You the owner?" "Yes, I'm the owner. Why are you cutting down my trees?" He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We got a work order from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. Says these trees are in violation of code and constitute an obstruction that needs to be removed." I stared at him like he had just told me the sky was green. "HOA? What HOA? I'm not part of any HOA. This property has been in my family since before any development existed out here." The man shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Look, buddy, I just do what the work order says. You'll have to take it up with them. We're just contractors. Here's the contact information." He handed me the paper, and I saw it was signed by someone named Patricia Henderson, HOA president of Meadowbrook Hills. "I don't care who signed it. You need to stop right now. This is my property, and I never authorized this." Another worker, younger with a thick beard, walked over. "We can't just stop in the middle of a job. We got a contract." "Your contract is with someone who has no authority over my property," I said, my voice rising. "If you cut down one more tree, I'm calling the police." The first man sighed and pulled out his phone. "Let me call the company." He walked a few feet away while I stood there, shaking with adrenaline and rage. I counted the fallen trees. 14. 14 of my grandfather's apple trees were lying on their sides, their branches still full of spring blossoms that would never become fruit. The contractor came back. "Boss says we need to pause until this gets sorted out. But lady, we're billing the HOA for the full day regardless." "I'm a man," I said automatically, too stressed to care much about the misunderstanding. "And I don't give a damn what you bill them. Just get off my property." They packed up their equipment with maddening slowness, and I stood there watching them, making sure they didn't cut down any more trees. When their truck finally pulled away down the long gravel driveway, I looked at the paper in my hand. The address for the Meadowbrook Hills HOA office was in a strip mall about 5 miles away, in the newer development that had sprung up over the past decade. I had heard about Meadowbrook Hills, of course. It was one of those planned communities with identical beige houses and strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to Christmas decorations. My property bordered the edge of their development, separated by an old fence line that marked where the original farmland ended and the new construction began. But I had never paid much attention to them, and I certainly had never signed anything putting my property under their control. I went inside and called the number on the paper. It rang 4 times before a woman answered with a syrupy voice that immediately set my teeth on edge. Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. This is Patricia speaking. How may I help you today? This is Isaac Zimmerman. Your contractors just cut down 14 of my apple trees without my permission. There was a pause. Mr. Zimmerman. Oh yes, I have your file right here. Sir, those trees were in clear violation of Section 14.3 of the Meadowbrook Hills Community Guidelines, which states that no tree or structure may exceed 15 feet in height if it creates a visual obstruction for neighboring properties. I don't live in Meadowbrook Hills, I said, trying to keep my voice level. My property is not part of your HOA. Actually, Mr. Zimmerman, if you check your property records, you'll find that when the Meadowbrook Hills development was approved by the county in 2019, all properties within a quarter-mile of the development boundary were automatically enrolled in the HOA to ensure community standards. That's not legal. You can't just force someone into an HOA. Her voice took on a patronizing tone that made me want to throw the phone across the room. Sir, I assure you it's completely legal. It was part of the county approval process. Now, regarding your trees, they have been an eyesore and an obstruction for quite some time. Multiple residents have complained that they block the view of the mountains from their back patios. The board voted unanimously to have them removed. Those trees are 60 years old. They're a working orchard. This is agricultural land. Was agricultural land, Patricia corrected. The zoning was changed to residential in 2018. I have all the documentation here. The trees needed to go, Mr. Zimmerman. I'm sorry you weren't properly notified, but the board sent multiple letters to your address. I never received any letters. That's not our problem. Perhaps you should check your mailbox more regularly. Now, the removal team will return on Monday to finish the job. Please do not interfere with them, or we'll be forced to seek legal action. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my kitchen, holding the phone and looking out at the fallen trees through the window. 76 trees were still standing, their branches heavy with blossoms that would soon become apples. Gravenstein, Ashmead's Kernel, Cox's Orange Pippin, Roxbury Russet. Varieties my grandfather had collected from all over the country, some of them nearly extinct in commercial production. And this woman, this Patricia Henderson, thought they were an eyesore. I called my lawyer immediately. His name was James Thornton, and he had handled my grandfather's estate when I inherited the property. He listened to my story without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Isaac, this is more complicated than you think. There's been a lot of controversy about these automatic HOA enrollments. Let me look into the legal precedents and the specific county ordinances. Don't let them cut down any more trees until I get back to you. What if they come back on Monday? Then you call the police and report them for trespassing and property destruction. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today and have it served to the HOA by Monday morning. But Isaac, I need to be honest with you. If they really did get county approval to extend their HOA authority to your property, this is going to be a long fight. I spent the rest of Saturday in a daze, walking through the orchard and documenting everything. I took photos of every tree, every fallen trunk, every scattered blossom. I measured the stumps and recorded which varieties had been destroyed. My grandfather had kept meticulous records in a leather journal that I still had in the house, and I matched each lost tree to his original planting diagram from 1965. 4 Gravensteins, 3 Cox's orange pippins, 2 Ashmead's kernels, 3 Roxbury russets, and 2 Spitzenbergs. All gone. That evening, I drove over to Meadowbrook Hills to see exactly what I was dealing with. The development was everything I expected. Cookie-cutter houses in shades of tan and gray, perfectly manicured lawns, young trees in plastic guards, and SUVs in every driveway. I found the street that backed up to my property and parked. Sure enough, several houses had back patios that faced toward my orchard. I could see my trees in the distance, their gnarled branches dark against the evening sky. A woman came out of one of the houses, carrying a glass of wine. She was probably in her mid-40s, with blonde highlights and an expression that suggested she was perpetually annoyed by something. She saw me standing there and walked over to the low fence that marked the edge of her property. "Can I help you?" she asked, in a tone that clearly meant, "What are you doing here?" "I'm Isaac Zimmerman. I own the orchard that backs up to your development." Her face lit up with recognition and something else. Satisfaction, maybe. "Oh, you're the one with all those ugly trees. Thank God the HOA is finally doing something about that. Do you know how much those trees lower our property values?" We moved here for the mountain views, not to stare at some overgrown farm. "Those trees are 60 years old. They're a heritage orchard." She waved her hand dismissively. "They're dead wood taking up space. This whole area is residential now. You need to adapt or move." Patricia Henderson has been working so hard to bring some standards to this neighborhood, and people like you just want to drag us all down. People like me. I was here first. My family has owned that land since 1963. Well, times change. Maybe you should have sold when you had the chance. She turned and walked back to her house, and I heard her lock the sliding glass door behind her. I drove home feeling like I had fallen into an alternate dimension where common sense and property rights didn't exist. How had things gotten so twisted that a 60-year-old orchard was considered an eyesore, but a development of identical beige boxes was considered an improvement? Monday morning came too soon. James called me at 7. "I've got the cease and desist letter ready, and I'm having it served to Patricia Henderson at the HOA office at 9. I also did some digging over the weekend. Isaac, the situation is worse than I thought. The county did approve an expansion of the HOA boundaries in 2019, but there's a catch. Property owners were supposed to be notified by certified mail and given a chance to appeal. Do you remember receiving anything like that?" "No. I was still living in Seattle in 2019. I didn't move here full-time until after my grandfather died in 2024. That might be the issue. The notice might have been sent to your grandfather, and if he was already declining by then, he might not have responded or understood what it meant. Do you have any of his mail from that period? I have boxes of his papers in the attic. I haven't gone through all of it yet. Do that today. Look for anything from the county or the HOA dated 2018 or 2019. If we can prove improper notice, we might be able to challenge the entire enrollment." At 8:30, a police car pulled into my driveway. My heart sank until I saw that it was just one officer, a middle-aged man with a kind face. He introduced himself as Deputy Martinez. "Mr. Zimmerman, I got a call from the HOA office saying you threatened their contractors on Saturday. They were cutting down my trees without permission. I told them to stop. Did you threaten them with violence?" "No. I told them I'd call the police if they didn't leave my property." Deputy Martinez nodded slowly. "That's what they said too, actually. The HOA president insisted I come out here to file a report, but the contractors themselves said you were upset, but not threatening. Between you and me, I think this is a civil matter, not a criminal one, but I do need to document that I came out here." He paused. "Nice orchard you got here. My grandmother had apple trees when I was growing up. I spent a lot of summers picking fruit. My grandfather planted these in 1965. The HOA cut down 14 of them on Saturday." His expression darkened. "Did you authorize that?" "No. They claim I'm part of their HOA now and the trees violate some rule." "Are you part of the HOA?" "They say I am. I say I'm not. My lawyer is working on it." Deputy Martinez looked out at the orchard, then back at me. "Mr. Zimmerman, I can't give you legal advice, but I can tell you this. If someone comes on your property and starts cutting down trees without your clear permission, you have every right to ask them to leave. If they refuse, you call us and we'll remove them for trespassing. You understand?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." "And if I were you, I'd put up some no trespassing signs right away. Make it crystal clear that this is private property and entry is not authorized." He handed me his card. "You call me directly if they come back. Don't confront them yourself. Just call." After he left, I drove to the hardware store in town and bought a dozen large no trespassing signs. I posted them along the fence line between my property and Meadowbrook Hills and along my driveway. Then I went up to the attic and started going through my grandfather's papers. He had saved everything: bills, receipts, letters, Christmas cards, seed catalogs. I found boxes organized by year and started with 2018. It took me 3 hours, but I finally found it. A letter from Chelan County, dated November 2018, informing property owners within the designated area that the Meadowbrook Hills HOA boundaries were being expanded and that they had 30 days to file an appeal. The letter was still in its envelope, unopened. My grandfather had suffered a stroke in September 2018. He had recovered enough to stay in his home with help from a caregiver, but his cognition had never fully returned. He probably received this letter, looked at the official county seal, and simply set it aside, unable to process what it meant. By the time the 30-day window closed, he was legally part of an HOA he had never wanted to join. I called James immediately and told him what I found. "This is good," he said. "It's not great, but it's good. We can argue that your grandfather was incapacitated and unable to respond, and that you, as his heir, were not given proper notice. It's not a guarantee, but it gives us something to work with. I'll amend the cease and desist to include this information." Tuesday morning, the contractors showed up again. I heard their truck coming down the driveway and immediately called Deputy Martinez. He arrived before they even got out of the vehicle. "Gentlemen," he said, stepping between them and the orchard, "Mr. Zimmerman has posted no trespassing signs and has informed me that you do not have permission to be on this property. I need you to leave." The lead contractor, the same tired-looking man from Saturday, held up his phone. "We have a work order and the HOA president is insisting we complete the job." "The HOA president doesn't own this property. Mr. Zimmerman does, and he's telling you to leave. If you proceed, you'll be trespassing and I'll have to arrest you." The contractors looked at each other, then back at their truck. "We need to call our boss." "You can call whoever you want, but do it from the public road. Move your vehicle now." They left, and Deputy Martinez stayed for another 20 minutes to make sure they didn't come back. "This is going to escalate," he told me before he left. "HOAs can be relentless when they think they're in the right. Document everything and don't engage with them directly. Let your lawyer handle it." That afternoon, I got a letter via email from Patricia Henderson. It was CC'd to the entire Meadowbrook Hills HOA board and was written in the most condescending tone imaginable. "Dear Mr. Zimmerman, It has come to our attention that you are refusing to comply with the lawful directives of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. Your orchard constitutes a clear violation of community standards and is negatively impacting property values for dozens of homeowners. The trees are overgrown, poorly maintained, and create a visual obstruction that our residents should not have to tolerate. We have been more than patient in trying to address this issue, but your continued obstruction leaves us no choice but to pursue legal remedies. Please be advised that the HOA will be filing a lawsuit seeking a court order to remove the trees, as well as reimbursement for all legal fees and contractor costs incurred. Additionally, you are now subject to daily fines of $200 for each day the violation continues. As of today, you owe the HOA $1,600 in accumulated fines. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson, President, Meadowbrook Hills HOA. I forwarded the email to James, who called me back within an hour. He was angry in a way I had never heard him before. This is extortion. They're trying to bankrupt you into compliance. We're filing a countersuit tomorrow morning. I'm going after them for property damage, harassment, and illegal collection practices. Isaac, this is going to get expensive, but I think we can win. How expensive? Legal fees could run $20,000 to $30,000, maybe more if it goes to trial. But if we win, we can recover those costs from the HOA. The question is, can you afford to fight this? I thought about the orchard, about my grandfather's journal, about 60 years of careful cultivation. I don't have a choice. These trees are worth more than money. Over the next 2 weeks, things spiraled out of control. The HOA sent me daily emails updating my fine balance, which quickly climbed past $5,000. Patricia Henderson sent letters to all the Meadowbrook Hills residents, painting me as a selfish hermit who was ruining their property values out of spite. Someone, I assume from the development, started a Facebook group called Save Our Views that posted photos of my orchard with captions like, "This eyesore is destroying our neighborhood," and "One man's greed vs. an entire community." The local newspaper got wind of the story and sent a reporter to interview me. Her name was Linda Foster, and she was a sharp woman in her 30s who seemed genuinely interested in getting the facts straight. I walked her through the orchard, showing her the heritage varieties, explaining my grandfather's work, and showing her the stumps of the 14 trees that had been cut down. "This is fascinating," she said, taking photos of the Ashmead's kernel trees that were just beginning to set fruit. "Do you know how rare some of these varieties are? I've been doing some research, and these trees could be historically significant. My grandfather thought so. He spent his whole life preserving them. And the HOA wants to cut them all down because they block someone's view." That's what they say. But I think it's more about control. They want everything to look the same, fit the same mold. Anything that's different is a threat. The article came out on Sunday, and it was more favorable than I could have hoped. Linda had titled it, "Heritage Orchard Faces Destruction. HOA Targets 60-Year Family Farm." She included quotes from local historians about the importance of preserving agricultural heritage. And she had even tracked down an expert on heritage apples, who confirmed that several of my grandfather's varieties were indeed rare and valuable for genetic preservation. The article got picked up by the regional news, and suddenly, my phone was ringing off the hook. A professor from Washington State University called and asked if he could visit the orchard to document the varieties. A heritage fruit preservation nonprofit offered to help me fight the HOA. People I had never met sent me messages of support and small donations to help with legal fees. But the attention also intensified the opposition. Patricia Henderson gave an interview to the same newspaper, saying that the article was biased and one-sided, and that the HOA was simply trying to maintain community standards that all residents had agreed to. She made it sound like I was a troublemaker who had moved into a nice neighborhood and was deliberately trying to cause problems. The lawsuit moved forward slowly, as legal matters always do. James filed our complaint in Chelan County Superior Court, arguing that the HOA enrollment was invalid due to improper notice, that the HOA had no authority to impose rules on my property, and that the destruction of the 14 trees constituted illegal property damage. The HOA filed a counter-complaint arguing that I was legally part of the HOA, that the trees were a code violation, and that I owed them over $10,000 in fines. The preliminary hearing was set for mid-June. In the meantime, I had an orchard to maintain. The apples were growing steadily, going from tiny green nubs to recognizable fruit. I spent hours every day thinning the crop, removing enough small apples so that the remaining ones would grow large and healthy. It was meditative work, the kind of thing my grandfather had done every summer for 60 years. One evening in late May, I was out in the orchard when I heard voices from the other side of the fence. I walked over and saw a group of people standing in the backyard of one of the Meadowbrook Hills houses. They were having some kind of meeting, and I recognized Patricia Henderson's voice immediately. "The legal process is taking too long," she was saying. "And every day those trees stand there, our property values drop. We need to take more direct action." "What are you suggesting?" someone else asked. "I'm suggesting that sometimes code enforcement needs to happen whether the owner cooperates or not. Those trees are a hazard. What if one of them fell and hurt someone? What if they are diseased and could spread to other properties? Are they diseased? That's not the point. The point is that they could be. We have a responsibility to protect our community." I stood very still, listening. Another voice, male this time, spoke up. "Patricia, we can't just go onto his property and cut down the trees. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. We're not going onto his property. We're protecting ours. The trees on his side of the fence line have branches that hang over into our development. We have every right to trim those branches. If we trim them back far enough, the trees will die on their own." My blood went cold. She was talking about girdling the trees by removing all their lower branches. It was a slow death sentence that would look like legitimate property maintenance. "When?" someone asked. "This weekend. Saturday morning early. We'll hire a different contractor, someone who doesn't know the history. By the time he figures out what's happening, it'll be done." I pulled out my phone and started recording, capturing the rest of their conversation. They talked logistics for another 10 minutes before the meeting broke up. As soon as they were gone, I called James. "They're planning to kill the trees by cutting branches that hang over the property line," I told him. "This Saturday morning. Did you get it recorded? Every word." "Good. Send it to me right now. I'm going to file an emergency injunction first thing in the morning. If the judge grants it, the HOA will be legally barred from touching anything related to your property until the case is resolved." I sent him the recording and spent a sleepless night wondering if a judge would move fast enough to stop them. James came through. By Thursday afternoon, he called me with good news. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. The HOA is prohibited from entering your property, cutting any branches, or taking any action related to the trees until the preliminary hearing. I had a sheriff's deputy serve Patricia Henderson the order about an hour ago. How did she react? Let's just say she wasn't happy. But Isaac, you need to understand something. This restraining order is temporary. At the preliminary hearing, the judge will decide whether to extend it or dismiss it. That hearing is going to be crucial. We need to be prepared for anything. The weeks leading up to the hearing were tense. I installed security cameras around the orchard, covering every angle. The professor from WSU came and spent 2 days documenting every tree, taking samples, and recording detailed notes about each variety. He confirmed what my grandfather had known. The orchard contained several varieties that were nearly extinct in commercial cultivation, including one tree that might be the last surviving example of a variety called Westfield. Seek no further. This orchard is a living museum, he told me. If these trees are destroyed, we'll lose genetic diversity that can never be recovered. Some of these apples have traits that could be crucial for breeding new varieties that are disease-resistant or climate-adapted. I asked him if he would testify at the hearing, and he agreed immediately. James was building a strong case, bringing in experts to testify about the historical and agricultural significance of the orchard, as well as legal experts to argue that the HOA enrollment was improper. The night before the hearing, I walked through the orchard one more time. The apples were about the size of golf balls now, still green but growing steadily. In another 3 months, they would be ripe and ready to harvest. My grandfather used to say that you could taste history in an old apple variety, that every bite connected you to all the people who had grown and eaten that same apple over centuries. I had never fully understood what he meant until now, when I was fighting to preserve that connection. The hearing was held in the Chelan County Courthouse in Wenatchee. James and I arrived early, and I was surprised to see how many people were already there. Linda Foster from the newspaper was there, along with several other reporters. The professor from WSU was there with a thick folder of documentation. Several people I recognized from the Facebook support group were there. And on the other side of the room, Patricia Henderson sat with her lawyer and a large group of Meadowbrook Hills residents. Patricia looked exactly like I expected a HOA president named Patricia to look. She was probably 50, with carefully styled brown hair, expensive clothes, and an expression of absolute certainty that she was right. She glared at me as I walked in, and I heard her say something to her lawyer that made him shake his head. The judge was an older woman named Margaret Chen, and she had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She called the hearing to order and asked both sides to present their arguments. The HOA lawyer went first. He was a slick young man in an expensive suit who spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from winning too many easy cases. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of code enforcement. Mr. Zimmerman's property was legally enrolled in the Meadowbrook Hills HOA in 2019, following proper county procedures. As a member of the HOA, he is subject to the community guidelines, which clearly state that trees exceeding 15 feet in height cannot create visual obstructions for neighboring properties. Mr. Zimmerman's orchard is in clear violation of this guideline. The HOA has attempted to resolve this matter amicably, but Mr. Zimmerman has refused to cooperate. We are simply asking the court to enforce the HOA rules and order the removal of the trees, as well as award the HOA the fines and legal fees Mr. Zimmerman has accumulated through his obstruction. Judge Chen listened without expression, then turned to James. Mr. Thornton, James stood up, and I could see he was in his element. Your Honor, this case represents a fundamental violation of property rights. Mr. Zimmerman's grandfather purchased this property in 1963 and established the orchard in 1965, decades before the Meadowbrook Hills development even existed. In 2019, the county approved an expansion of the HOA boundaries that included Mr. Zimmerman's property, but the notice was sent to his grandfather, who was incapacitated following a stroke. The notice was never opened, and no appeal was filed because the recipient was unable to understand what was being asked of him. Mr. Zimmerman, who inherited the property in 2024, was never given notice of the HOA enrollment and never agreed to be bound by its rules. Furthermore, the orchard in question is not merely an aesthetic issue. It is a heritage agricultural site containing rare and historically significant apple varieties, some of which may be the last surviving examples of their kind. We have expert testimony to support this. The HOA's attempt to destroy this orchard is not only legally questionable, but also culturally and historically reckless. The HOA lawyer stood up again. Your Honor, the incapacitation of the previous property owner, while unfortunate, does not invalidate the legal notice that was provided. The county followed proper procedures, and the HOA boundaries were legally expanded. As for the historical significance of the trees, that's irrelevant to the question of code enforcement. The rules are the rules, and they apply equally to all properties within the HOA boundaries. Judge Chen leaned back in her chair. I've reviewed the filings from both sides, and I have some questions. Mr. Thornton, you argue that notice was improper because it was sent to an incapacitated person. Do you have medical documentation of your client's grandfather's condition in November 2018? Yes, Your Honor. James handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. You'll find hospital records from the stroke in September 2018, as well as statements from his physician indicating that he had significant cognitive impairment affecting his ability to understand complex legal documents. Judge Chen reviewed the documents for several minutes. And Mr. Zimmerman, the current owner, when did he inherit the property? In March 2024, Your Honor, following his grandfather's death. So there was a 5-year gap between the HOA enrollment notice and Mr. Zimmerman taking ownership. That's correct, Your Honor. During that time, Mr. Zimmerman was living in Seattle and was not involved in the day-to-day management of the property. His grandfather continued to live on the property with assistance until his death. The judge turned to the HOA lawyer. Counsel, did the HOA make any attempt to notify Mr. Zimmerman directly after he inherited the property? The lawyer shuffled through his papers. The HOA sent letters to the property address, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Did you send notification to Mr. Zimmerman personally, informing him that the property was now part of the HOA and explaining his rights and obligations? The notice requirements were fulfilled at the time of enrollment, Your Honor. There's no legal requirement to re-notify when a property changes hands. Perhaps not, Judge Chen said, but it might have avoided this entire situation. Let me ask you something else. These trees have been standing for 60 years. When did they suddenly become a violation of HOA rules? The HOA guidelines regarding tree height and visual obstructions have been in place since the development was established in 2015, Your Honor. However, enforcement has been a gradual process. The board prioritized other violations first and only recently turned their attention to Mr. Zimmerman's property. So these trees have been violating your rules since 2019, when the property was enrolled, but the HOA waited until 2026 to do anything about it. The board has discretion in enforcement priorities, Your Honor. Judge Chen made a note. Let's talk about the actual removal of the trees. Mr. Thornton, you claim that HOA contractors removed 14 trees without Mr. Zimmerman's permission. Can you prove that? Yes, Your Honor. James presented photos I had taken, along with statements from the contractors themselves confirming that they had cut down the trees based on a work order from Patricia Henderson. And Miss Henderson, You authorized this removal. Patricia stood up, and her lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she shook him off. Your Honor, those trees were a violation. The board voted to remove them. We had every right to enforce our rules. You had every right to seek legal enforcement of your rules, Judge Chen corrected. You did not have the right to take unilateral action to destroy property, especially when the property owner's membership in your HOA is in dispute. That's called conversion, and it's illegal. Patricia's face turned red. Those trees were an eyesore and a nuisance. Our residents shouldn't have to look at that every day. Your residents moved into a development that borders agricultural land, Judge Chen said sharply. If they wanted an unobstructed view of the mountains, perhaps they should have moved to the mountains. Sit down, Miss Henderson. I felt a surge of hope. The judge was clearly not sympathetic to the HOA's position. She called a 15-minute recess, and James pulled me aside. This is going well, but don't get overconfident. She's still going to want to hear the expert testimony before she makes a decision. After the recess, the professor from WSU took the stand. He explained his credentials, his research on heritage fruit varieties, and the significance of my grandfather's orchard. He had brought photos and charts showing the genetic relationships between different varieties, and he explained how the loss of rare varieties could impact future breeding programs. These trees represent a genetic library that has taken centuries to develop, he said. Some of the varieties in Mr. Zimmerman's orchard have traits that are unique and potentially valuable for addressing modern challenges like disease resistance and climate adaptation. If these trees are destroyed, we lose that genetic information forever. It's not like losing a building or a piece of art that can be recreated. Once these specific trees are gone, there's no getting them back. The HOA lawyer cross-examined him, trying to suggest that the varieties weren't really that rare or that the university could simply propagate new trees from cuttings. The professor patiently explained that while grafting was possible, it took years to establish new trees, and that the specific genetics of these 60-year-old trees, including their rootstock and their adaptation to the local soil and climate, couldn't be replicated. Then it was my turn to testify. James asked me about my grandfather, about the orchard, about what the trees meant to my family. I told the judge about growing up visiting the farm, about helping my grandfather harvest apples every fall, about the leather journal where he had recorded 60 years of observations about weather, pests, yields, and flavor. These trees are my grandfather's legacy, I said. He spent his entire adult life caring for them. When he left them to me, he trusted me to protect them. I'm not fighting the HOA because I'm stubborn or difficult. I'm fighting because these trees deserve to be here, and because forcing me into an HOA I never agreed to join is wrong. Patricia's lawyer asked me about the unopened letter from 2018, trying to suggest that it was my fault for not ensuring my grandfather's mail was being properly managed. I explained about the stroke, about my grandfather's decline, about how I had been working in Seattle and visiting when I could but not managing his daily affairs. So you admit that you weren't paying attention to his legal matters, the lawyer said. I admit that I didn't know about a letter that he never opened because he couldn't understand it, I said. If the county or the HOA had cared enough to follow up, to make sure that people actually understood what was happening, none of this would have occurred. But they didn't follow up. They just checked a box that said notice was sent and moved on. Finally, James called Linda Foster, the reporter, to testify about the community response to the story. She described the outpouring of support from local residents, the interest from preservation organizations, and the broader conversation about HOA overreach that the case had sparked. "This case has struck a nerve," she said. "People are tired of HOAs that seem more interested in control than in building real communities." The response to my article was overwhelming and almost universally supportive of Mr. Zimmerman. When all the testimony was finished, Judge Chen took another brief recess to review her notes. When she came back, her expression was serious. "I've heard enough to make a preliminary ruling," she said. "First, on the question of whether Mr. Zimmerman's property was properly enrolled in the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. I find that, while the county technically followed the notice requirements, the notice was sent to an individual who was medically unable to respond to it, and no attempt was made to verify that the notice was understood or to follow up with the family. Furthermore, when the property changed hands in 2024, the HOA made no effort to inform the new owner of his obligations or his rights. While this may not technically violate the letter of the law, it certainly violates the spirit of it. However, this is a preliminary hearing, and I'm not going to make a final determination on the validity of the HOA enrollment at this time. That will require a full trial." My heart sank a little, but the judge wasn't finished. "Second, on the question of the trees themselves. I find that the Meadowbrook Hills HOA acted improperly and illegally when it authorized contractors to remove trees from Mr. Zimmerman's property without a court order. The fact that the HOA believed it had the authority to do so does not excuse the action. The proper procedure would have been to seek a court order for the removal, not to take unilateral action. Therefore, I am extending the temporary restraining order and making it a preliminary injunction. The HOA is barred from taking any action related to Mr. Zimmerman's orchard, including the removal of trees, the trimming of branches, or the assessment of fines, until this matter is resolved at trial." Patricia jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, that's not fair. Those trees are destroying our property values. Miss Henderson, you are not an attorney and you are not a party to this case in your personal capacity. Sit down and be quiet, or I will hold you in contempt. Your attorney can make any arguments he wishes." The HOA lawyer stood up, looking flustered. "Your Honor, the HOA requests that the court at least allow for the assessment of reasonable fines to continue, as this is provided for in the HOA guidelines." Request denied. As I said, the validity of Mr. Zimmerman's HOA membership is in dispute. Until that question is resolved, the HOA has no authority to assess fines. Now, as for damages. Mr. Thornton, you've requested compensation for the 14 trees that were removed. Do you have an estimated value? Yes, Your Honor. We've had an arborist assess the value of the lost trees based on their age, rarity, and condition. The total comes to $42,000. The number was higher than I expected, and I saw Patricia gasp. Her lawyer shook his head vigorously. "Your Honor, that's an outrageous figure. These are just apple trees, not exotic specimens." The judge looked at him coldly. "Counsel, I've just heard extensive testimony about how these are not just apple trees. They are 60-year-old heritage varieties, some of which are nearly extinct. $42,000 for 14 mature, rare fruit trees is not out of line. However, I'm not going to award damages at this preliminary stage. That will also wait for trial. But Mr. Thornton, I want you to know that if Mr. Zimmerman prevails at trial, I will very seriously consider awarding full damages, plus legal fees." She turned to the HOA lawyer. "I'm also putting the HOA on notice. If there are any further attempts to interfere with Mr. Zimmerman's property, including the branch trimming scheme that was discussed and recorded, I will not only hold the HOA in contempt, but I will also refer the matter to the prosecutor's office for possible criminal charges." Property destruction is a crime, regardless of whether you believe you have the authority to do it. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer said quietly. Good. This hearing is adjourned. The trial date will be set for October 15th. Both parties should be prepared for a full evidentiary hearing at that time. We left the courthouse feeling like we had won a major battle, even though the war wasn't over. James was cautiously optimistic. Judge Chen is clearly skeptical of the HOA's position, but she's not going to rule on the validity of the enrollment without a full trial. We need to keep building our case. The good news is that the injunction protects your trees until October. What about the 14 trees they already cut down? Can we get them back? We can get compensation for them, but we can't bring them back. I'm sorry, Isaac, but if we win at trial, we can make sure it never happens again, and we can make the HOA pay for what they did. Over the summer, I threw myself into caring for the orchard. The apples grew steadily, going from green to their mature colors as the varieties ripened at different times. The early varieties, the Gravensteins that hadn't been destroyed, ripened in late July, and I spent a weekend picking them and pressing them into cider. The taste was incredible, complex and rich in a way that store-bought apples never were. I started selling apples at the local farmer's market, something my grandfather had done occasionally, but never in a serious way. People loved them, especially when I explained the history of each variety. I sold out every week and started taking orders for the fall harvest. The orchard was becoming profitable in a way it had never been before, and I realized that this was part of what I was fighting for. It wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about making sure this land could continue to have a purpose. Patricia Henderson and the HOA went quiet after the hearing, but I knew they were still there, still planning. The Facebook group, Save Our Views, continued posting angry messages about how the judge was biased and how I was destroying the neighborhood. But there was another group now, Save the Orchard, that had even more members. People posted photos of heritage apples, shared articles about the importance of preserving agricultural land, and offered support for my legal fight. In late August, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who identified herself as a board member of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. Mr. Zimmerman, I want you to know that not all of us support what Patricia is doing. Several board members voted against the tree removal, but Patricia railroaded us. She's facing a recall election next month, and I think there's a good chance she'll be removed from the board. Why are you telling me this? Because I think we can settle this case if Patricia is no longer in charge. The legal fees are draining the HOA reserves, and a lot of residents are angry about it. They didn't buy into this development to spend tens of thousands of dollars fighting a neighbor over trees. If Patricia is recalled, I'm going to propose that the new board withdraw the lawsuit and negotiate a settlement with you. What kind of settlement? I can't make any promises, but I think we could agree that your property was improperly enrolled and remove you from the HOA. In exchange, maybe you'd agree to maintain the trees in a way that addresses some of the visual concerns, like trimming the branches that overhang into the development. I already do that, I said. I've been maintaining these trees for 2 years. They're not overgrown or neglected. I know. I've seen them. They're beautiful, honestly. Patricia just has this vision of what the neighborhood should look like, and anything that doesn't fit that vision is a threat to her. The recall election happened in mid-September, and Patricia Henderson was removed from the board by a vote of 62% to 38%. The new board president was a reasonable man named David Wu, and he called me within days of taking office. Mr. Zimmerman, I'd like to meet with you and your attorney to discuss resolving this matter. The HOA has spent over $40,000 on legal fees, and we're facing the possibility of paying damages for the trees that were removed. That's money that should be going to maintain our common areas and keep our dues low. I think we can find a solution that works for everyone. James and I met with David Wu and the HOA's lawyer the following week. The meeting was held in a conference room at a local hotel, neutral territory. David was a software engineer in his early 40s, and he struck me as someone who valued logic and fairness over ego and control. "Here's what I'm proposing," David said. "The HOA will formally remove your property from its boundaries, acknowledging that the enrollment was improper. We'll drop all fines and withdraw our lawsuit. In exchange, we'd like you to agree to maintain a buffer zone along the fence line, keeping the trees trimmed back far enough that they don't overhang into the development. We'll also ask that you dismiss your counterclaim for damages." I looked at James and he gave a small nod. "What about the 14 trees that were cut down?" I asked. David grimaced. "That was a disaster, and I'm sorry it happened. The previous board acted rashly and illegally. We can't undo that, but we're willing to pay compensation. Not the full $42,000 your arborist estimated, but a reasonable amount. Would you accept $20,000? $25,000, James said. And the HOA issues a formal apology acknowledging that the removal was unauthorized and wrong. David looked at his lawyer, who nodded slowly. "We can do that. $25,000, paid within 30 days of signing the settlement agreement, and a formal letter of apology from the board." "There's one more thing," I said. "Patricia Henderson needs to personally apologize for what she did." David shook his head. "I can't force Patricia to do anything. She's not on the board anymore. Then I want a written statement from the HOA acknowledging that Patricia Henderson acted outside her authority and that her actions do not represent the values of the current board. That I can do." We spent another hour working out the details, but by the end of the meeting, we had the outline of a settlement. James would draft the formal agreement, and if both sides signed it, we could avoid going to trial in October. I left the meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't a complete victory. I had still lost 14 trees, and no amount of money could replace them. But the remaining 76 trees would be safe, and I would be free of the HOA's control. The settlement was finalized in early October, just a week before the scheduled trial date. The HOA paid the $25,000, which covered most of my legal fees and left me with a little extra to invest in the orchard. They issued a formal statement acknowledging that the tree removal had been unauthorized and that Patricia Henderson had exceeded her authority. And most importantly, my property was officially removed from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA boundaries. I used part of the settlement money to plant 14 new trees to replace the ones that had been destroyed. They were young saplings, grafted from cuttings taken from my grandfather's remaining trees, and they would take years to reach maturity. But they were there, living proof that the orchard would continue. The fall harvest was extraordinary. The Cox's orange pippins were perfect, crisp and sweet with a flavor like honeyed spice. The Ashmead's kernels were their usual strange selves, russeted and ugly but tasting like liquid gold. The Roxbury russets lived up to their reputation as the oldest American apple variety, with a complex flavor that improved in storage. I sold apples at the farmer's market, supplied local restaurants and cider makers, and still had enough left over to press several barrels of cider for myself. In early November, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Patricia Henderson, handwritten on expensive stationery. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mr. Zimmerman," it read, I am writing to apologize for my actions regarding your orchard. I believed I was doing what was best for the Meadowbrook Hills community, but I can see now that I was wrong. Your trees are not an eyesore. They are a reminder of what this land used to be, before people like me came along and tried to turn everything into something uniform and controlled. I have lived my whole life believing that order and rules were the most important things, but you have shown me that there are things more important than matching houses and unobstructed views. Your grandfather's orchard is a gift to this community, whether my former neighbors realize it or not. I hope you will accept my apology, though I understand if you cannot. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson. I read the letter twice, looking for sarcasm or hidden meaning, but it seemed genuine. I wrote back a short note saying that I accepted her apology and hoped she had found some peace. I didn't expect to hear from her again, and I didn't. As winter set in, I spent my evenings in the farmhouse, reading my grandfather's journal by the fire. He had written entries for nearly every day of his 60 years with the orchard, recording temperatures and rainfall, bloom dates and harvest yields, pest problems and solutions. But scattered among the practical observations were more personal reflections. March 12, 1978, one entry read: The Spitzenbergs are blooming early this year, beautiful pink flowers against the blue sky. I think about what these trees will be like in 50 years when I'm gone. Will someone still care for them? Will they still produce fruit? I have to believe the answer is yes. These trees are bigger than me, bigger than any one person. They connect us to the past and the future at the same time. I understood now what he meant. The orchard wasn't just trees, it was a living connection to everyone who had planted and tended and harvested before me. And it was a gift to everyone who would come after, as long as someone was willing to fight for it. In December, the local newspaper ran a follow-up article on the case. Linda Foster had tracked down the resolution and written a piece titled "Orchard Saved. HOA Backs Down After Months-Long Battle." The article included an update on the fall harvest, quotes from the professor at WSU about the importance of the settlement, and a photo of me standing among the trees with a basket of apples. The article mentioned that Patricia Henderson had been recalled, and that the new HOA board had negotiated a settlement. It quoted David Wu, saying that the HOA had learned an important lesson about respecting property rights and listening to all stakeholders, not just the ones who complained the loudest. As I read the article, I thought about all the things that could have gone differently. If my grandfather had opened that letter in 2018, if I had moved to the farm sooner and been there to fight the HOA enrollment from the beginning, if Patricia Henderson had been less rigid and more willing to listen, if the first board meeting had included voices like David Wu, instead of being dominated by people who saw anything different as a threat. But none of those things had happened. Instead, I had been forced to fight for something that should never have been threatened in the first place. And in the process, I had learned things about myself and about the community I lived in. The orchard became something of a local landmark after the case was settled. People would drive out to see the trees, especially in the spring when they were in bloom. I started giving occasional tours, explaining the different varieties and the history of the farm. Schools brought classes out for field trips, and the kids loved picking apples and learning about where food comes from. I hired a part-time assistant to help with the orchard work, a young woman named Emily who was studying horticulture and wanted hands-on experience with heritage fruit trees. She was fascinated by the Westfield Seek No Further tree, the one the professor had identified as potentially the last of its kind, and she spent hours researching its history and characteristics. "This tree is amazing," she told me one day as we were pruning. Do you know that this variety was Thomas Jefferson's favorite apple? He wrote about it in his garden journals. And now there might be only one tree left in the world, and it's right here in your orchard. My grandfather would be proud, I said. He always said these trees were important, but I don't think even he knew just how important. In March, on what would have been my grandfather's 92nd birthday, I organized a small ceremony to dedicate a plaque in the orchard. James came, and Linda Foster, and the professor from WSU, and Emily, and about 50 other people who had supported me during the fight. David Wu came too, representing the HOA, and he brought a gift, a young apple tree, a modern variety bred for disease resistance. This is from the Meadowbrook Hills community, he said. We want to contribute to the orchard's future, not its destruction. This tree won't have the history of your grandfather's trees, but maybe someday, someone will look at it and remember that communities are stronger when they embrace diversity, not when they try to force conformity. I planted the tree at the edge of the orchard, near the fence line that separated my land from the development. It was a symbol, I hoped, of the possibility that people with different values and different visions could find a way to coexist without destroying what made each of them unique. The plaque I installed was simple, made of bronze and mounted on a stone pedestal near the Westfield Seek No Further tree. It read, "This orchard was established in 1965 by Thomas Zimmerman, who believed that preserving the past was essential to building the future. These trees are a gift to all who value history, diversity, and the connections that bind us to the land and to each other." As spring turned to summer, the orchard bloomed again. The flowers were just as beautiful as they had been the year before, maybe more so because I knew how close I had come to losing them. I spent long days working among the trees, thinning fruit and managing pests, and simply being present in a place that my grandfather had loved. One evening in late June, almost exactly a year after the chainsaw sounds had woken me up, I walked through the orchard as the sun was setting. The light filtered through the leaves, casting golden patterns on the grass. The young trees I had planted to replace the lost ones were growing well, their leaves bright green and healthy. In a few more years, they would bear their first apples, and the circle would continue. I thought about Patricia Henderson's apology letter, about David Wu's gift tree, about the plaque and the tours and the articles. The fight to save the orchard had transformed it from a private family heritage into something more public, something that belonged in a way to the whole community. That wasn't what I had intended when I started, but maybe it was what was supposed to happen. My grandfather had written in his journal that the trees were bigger than any one person. He was right. The orchard had survived 60 years through his care, and it had survived the attempt to destroy it through the care of many people. James and his legal expertise, Linda and her journalism, the professor and his scientific knowledge, all the strangers who had sent messages of support and small donations. It had taken a community to save the orchard, and now it would take a community to sustain it. As darkness fell, I walked back to the farmhouse, leaving the trees to stand watch over the land as they had done for 6 decades. Tomorrow I would be back out there, pruning and watering and tending, continuing the work my grandfather had started. The fight was over, but the real work, the work of preservation and care and connection, was just beginning. And I was ready for it, armed with the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible, especially then. Because those are the things that matter most, the things that connect us to who we were and who we will become. The things that make us human in a world that too often tries to make everything the same. The apple trees would stand as a reminder of that truth, bearing fruit for generations to come. as long as someone was willing to protect them.